Okay, this is accounting for factory overhead. So let's start. What is factory overhead? Overhead, well, these are costs that are not conveniently identified with particular orders or units of products. In short, these are indirect costs. Okay? Not like our direct labor and direct materials. No, once they are incurred, they can be easily traced in our products. That's why they are called direct cost. Now, any cost that cannot be classified as part of our direct materials or direct labor will be considered as an indirect cost, thus will be classified as part of our factory overhead. Take note, as long as they are used in manufacturing, but they cannot be classified as direct labor or direct materials, they are classified as factory overhead. Now, how do we control factory overhead? Now, when we talk about control of factory overhead, we're talking about monitoring and recording. Normally, your factory overhead is recorded, no, under the account title Factory Overhead Control, which is found in our general ledger. This serves as a controlling account. And you also have your factory overhead analysis sheet, okay, which most of the time, no, serves as your subsidiary ledger or your supporting account. Now, in some books, they also have the applied factory overhead as a separate account, okay, which is also found in our general ledger. I will explain more about that later when we go to examples. Now, in our lesson, you should also know how to compute, no, for the predetermined overhead rate. This was already discussed, no, in our previous chapters, no. So, as a review, how do you compute your predetermined overhead rate? First, you should come up with the budgeted or your total estimated factory overhead for the period, normally for 1 year, okay? And then you divide that by your estimated base or your activity level or your um, activity that will be used to compute or to apply your factory overhead. Okay, so that's also known as your allocation base, okay, in most of our textbook. Okay, so we'll have some examples to that later. Now, what's the use of your predetermined overhead rate? This is used to compute for your estimated overhead for the period, also known as your applied. And let me write that down. Okay, this was already discussed before, no? Your applied, and your applied factory overhead. This is the amount that will go to your work in process. Okay, so how do you compute that? You have the actual base or your allocation base. Okay, you multiply that by your predetermined overhead rate. Okay, so to compute for your predetermined overhead rate, you should first know what is your allocation base, okay, or the activity that you will be using to allocate your overhead. Okay, so these are just the common allocation basis. Okay, of course there are more, but these are the commonly used in most of the textbooks. No, you have your direct labor cost when you allocate your overhead based on direct labor cost. It could be based on direct labor hours, direct materials cost. Okay, you have your machine hours, and of course the number of units produced. Okay, so let's have an example. Let's assume you have the following figures for ABC company for the year 2009. Okay, let's say that the estimated factory overhead cost is 100,000. Okay, and you have the following: the number of units produced 50,000, direct materials cost, machine hours, direct labor hours, and then you have your direct labor cost. Okay, so feel free, no, to pause the video and take a screenshot. Ayan, kasi may babalikan natin yan. Now, the requirement is for us to compute the overhead rate based on the following. So if this is based on direct labor cost, your factory overhead rate will now be 100,000, okay, divided by your direct labor cost, which is in this case 250,000. Okay, so what is 100,000 divided by 250,000? This will be something like ito, parang 20%. May calculator naman eh. Sige, mag-calculator tayo. Paano na ba yun? Ayun. Okay, so let's try to divide 100,000. Divide that by 250. Is it 250,000 or 250 hours? Parang 250 hours yata yun. Pwede naman natin siyang okay. Ibaba natin. Mapapahiya ako nito eh. Direct labor cost pala. Cost. So, it's pesos. 250,000. Oops. Sobra ng zero. Tara. So, you now have 40%. Okay? Or 0.4. Now, this means that if you're going to apply this based on direct labor cost, your applied factory overhead is now 250,000 times 40%. Okay po, so pwede na ninyong i-compute yan. That will be around 40, kano ba yan? Parang 100 plus. Anyway, babalikan natin yan mamaya. And then you have also your direct labor hours. So you simply divide 100,000, that's your factory overhead, okay, divided by your direct labor hours, which is ayun, 40,000, okay. So you have your 40,000. Kaya magkano ito? 100 divided by 40, so that's around 2.5. Ayan, 2.5 per hour. If it is applied based on your direct materials, that will be 100,000 divided by your direct materials cost, which is 500,000. This will be around 20% or 0.2. If it's based on machine hours, so you divide 100,000 divided by 10,000. Bagalan lang natin para na-absorb nyo. So this will be how much? Ayan, so that will be 10 per hour. Ayun. And if it's based on the number of units produced, no? So you have 100,000 divided by 50,000 units produced. That will be 2 per, ayan, 2 per unit. Whew. Okay po. Ayan. So, what if, ayun na. So, what if we're going to compute for the applied factory overhead, no? So you simply multiply these rates with your actual. So dapat may actual pala tayo, no? Sige, mamaya magkakaroon tayo ng example dyan. Oops, wala. Sige, mag-example na tayo ngayon. Okay? So for example, your actual, let's try to erase this. So these are now your predetermined overhead rate. Yan. Now let's say that your actual, let's put it here na lang yan. Let's say that your actual number of units produced is 51. And then your actual direct materials cost is 480. For machine hours, siguro gawin natin 11 na lang yan. And then for direct labor hours, let's say we have 38. 38,000 or 38,500, and then you have your direct labor cost, which is let's say 255. Okay, there you go. So what do? We simply multiply this by our application rate, and you will get your applied. No? So based on direct labor cost, this will now be 40%. Okay, and then based on direct labor hours, you don't have to do all of this, no, because in practice, you will just choose one predetermined overhead rate. But anyway, for discussion purposes, we'll compute, no, lahat na lang. Let's say that your actual machine hours, ay hindi, given na pala. Your machine hours is, and that's your rate, 10 per hour. And then for your direct materials cost, the rate is, there you go, 20%. And then the number of units, let's say that the actual number of units produced is, ay nag-isip pa ako, nandito na pala. So you now have 2 per unit. So you have 2, 20%, 10 per hour. Then you have 2.5 per hour, and then you now have 40%. Okay? So let's try to compute. Yeah. So what will now be 51,000 times 2? This will be 102,000. This is now your applied. Now, if you remember our T accounts for manufacturing overhead, no? Okay, you have here your actual, debit for your actual and credit for your applied. Now, let's assume that your actual, no, actual factory overhead cost is, ano kayo maganda? Kunyari, 110. Okay, so you will have 110,000 here, and you will have your applied on this portion. In this case, 102 if you are using the number of units produced. Okay po? So, ayan. Now, let's continue. 480 times 20%. That will be 480 times 2, that's 96,000. Okay, times 10, this will be 110. 38.5 times 2.5. Ito, hindi na kaya to ng powers ko. Okay, so let's go to our calculator. Ayun pala. So, that will be, ayan, 38,000. Ayan, sabayan nyo ako. 38,500. Okay, if you have your calculator, okay, and then you multiply that by 2.5. Okay, so you have 96,250. 96,250. Okay. Now 255 times 40%. Remember 255 times 40%. Yan, 102. So you now have 102,000. So this is now your applied factory overhead. So assuming that we are applying, ano kayong maganda dito? Yan, let's choose direct labor hours. Assuming we are applying our factory overhead using direct labor hours of 38,500, our applied, okay, will now be 96,250. Okay, so hindi siya balance no? Our factory overhead. This is now what you call under-applied, which we will discuss later. Okay, under-applied is when your applied factory overhead is less than your actual. Over-applied if your applied is higher than your actual. Okay, so ganun lang siya kadali. Anyway, let's continue. How do you select your overhead basis? First, it should allow you to compute for the predetermined overhead rate easily, no? Okay, so it should be easily estimated. Aside from that, the factor chosen as the basis must be the one that can easily be easily be measured on each job. Measured dapat yan. Could be easily measured, no, on each job. So if you are using machine hours, so you should have the means to compute for your machine hours. If we are applying it based on direct labor hours, then you should be able to compute for your direct labor hours. Okay, so ganun lang yun. Okay? It's hard, no? If you want to apply your factory overhead using your machine hours and then you have no means on how to compute for your machine hours. And then the amount of overhead cost incurred must have some direct relationship with the base selected. In short, there should be causality. Tama ba yung spelling ko? Okay, I already discussed this earlier, no? It means that, well, there's really a cause and effect. Like for example, no? Let's say that your factory overhead is composed of costs like, let's say you're into wood furnitures, you know. So some of your overhead cost is, let's say, nails or hardware nails. So, yan. And then you also have your sandpaper. What else? Okay, what do you use to come up with a wooden furniture? Yung mga overhead natin. Let's assume you have your paint, you know, paint and varnish, okay, and so on. Okay. Now, if you try to look at the nature of this cost, no, it will not make sense if you're going to apply this using your direct labor hours, di ba? Okay, you should apply this using the direct materials used. Okay, because the more materials that you use, okay, more materials to process using your nails, sandpaper, paint, and varnish. Okay. For example, we're talking about utilities, especially power consumption. No? Your power or electricity, well, it can be applied using your direct labor hours. Okay, or better yet, no, if we are capital intensive, no, we have a lot of equipment. Ayan, you might as well apply, no, your power consumption using machine hours. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng causality. There should be some direct relationship with the base selected. Okay. Now, annualized overhead application rate. Okay, why do we need to annualize this? When we say annualize, you compute your rate on a yearly basis. Well, number one, to overcome fluctuations. Okay, like monthly fluctuations or quarterly fluctuations. And so, yeah, sige, basahin nyo na lang yan. How do we record factory overhead costs? We'll have some examples later, no? Pero let's just have a quick overview. There are two methods, okay? Method 1 and method 2, okay? They have the same journal entry to record your actual overhead cost. That will be to debit factory overhead control, okay, yung standard natin, and credit the various accounts pertaining to your factory overhead control, like it could be your accumulated depreciation, or for example, insurance payable, salaries payable, okay, or taxes, ayan, and so on and so forth. Okay, now, if you're going to record the estimated overhead or your applied, okay, so how do we compute for your applied? Di ba, you have your actual times your predetermined overhead rate. So once that is computed, and you now credit, dito sila nagkaiba. In here, in this method, no? Here in this method, you use your applied factory overhead. While in method 2, my favorite, okay, you just use your factory overhead control. This one, no? So that you will just have 1P accounts, okay, factory overhead control. You have here your actual, you have here your actual, and then you have here your applied, diba? So that the difference will now be your over or under applied, okay? If your applied is higher than your actual, that's your over applied. If actual is higher than applied, then that is now under applied. Okay po? Now, in method 1, you will be maintaining two T accounts, no? One for your factory overhead, okay, actual. Okay, so you will see it here. And then you will have your factory overhead applied. Ayan. Okay. Now let's continue. Okay, so assuming that you already have your actual and applied, and then you compute for your over applied and under applied, how do you dispose? No, your over applied and under applied. Now, when we say dispose, how do you close them? Now, it really depends if you think that your over or under applied is material or immaterial. If it is immaterial, okay, if it's immaterial, you can close that directly to your cost of sales. In this case, for over applied, no, for over applied, let's review. Okay, when do you have an over applied factory overhead? When this one is higher than your actual, right? Okay, so if this one is higher, then to close that, you get the difference and you debit that. Okay, para mag-close na, okay, your balance will be zero. It will all be close to your cost of sales. So if it's under applied, you just reverse the entry. It will be a debit to cost of sales and a credit to factory overhead control. Why do we use cost of sales? No, for example, here, no, it's under applied. Okay, this means that the amount of factory overhead that went to your work in process is less than your actual, which means, okay, this will result to a lower cost of goods manufactured. Okay, and if that is sold, okay, you will have lower cost of goods sold. Okay, so parang ganun. Tama ba? Wait lang. If this is, oh, I'm sorry, it's over applied. So if it's over applied, it's the opposite. Di ba? That will be overstated. And your cost of sales will be overstated. Okay, so you're going to reduce your cost of sales. Now, if it's under applied, okay, your actual, ito na yun, your actual is more than your applied. Therefore, what will go to your work in process is lower than your actual, which will result to lower cost of goods manufactured and lower cost of goods sold. That's why for under applied, you add or you increase your cost of sales. Now, in this case, okay, in this case, you're going to close the entire applied and the entire balance for your actual. The difference will go to your cost of sales. Okay? Ganon din dito, if it's under applied, it's just the opposite. So, ito po yung applied and this one is now your actual. Okay, standard and then actual. The difference will go to your cost of sales. This one should be the same with this one. Okay? So, ganun din po dito. Now, what if it's material? Then you should close it to your inventories. Now, take note, for this one, for this example, we assume that the difference is immaterial. So, if it is material, you are now going to allocate that to your inventories. So, instead of just using cost of sales, you're now going to allocate that to work in process and finished goods. Okay, why? Okay, because if it's over applied, okay, your work in process, yan, will also be overstated, no? Because what goes to your work in process is the applied factory overhead, right? Okay, if you go to your previous, ayan, previous entry, you debit work in process for the applied. Ayan. So if that happens, your work in process is overstated. That's why you have to credit that, not to correct. Okay? And aside from that, it will result to a higher cost of goods manufactured. Actually, this one will be close to your finished goods. Okay? And it will also result to higher cost of sales. Okay, ayan. So your cost of goods manufactured will be divided into two, okay? The part which is sold and the part which is not yet sold, or the ending balance of your finished goods. Okay, so eto na siya. And that's why you have to correct them. And the opposite, okay, will also be true. If it's under applied, your actual is higher, okay, than your applied, okay, which means your work in process is understated. That's why you have to increase that. Your cost of goods manufactured is also understated, okay, and your CGM, okay, will go to your ending balance finished goods and your cost of sales if it's already sold. Okay, so we almost have the same entry. The only difference is that here we just use the factory overhead control for the difference. Okay, here we are using two accounts. We are closing the actual and we are closing the applied. The difference will be allocated to these inventories. So let's have an example. This is just a continuation of the earlier problem. So, paano ba yung problem natin kanina? Okay, let's go back. Okay, so this is our problem and we chose to apply our overhead using direct labor hours. Okay, so you now have the actual, which is 110, and then you now have your applied, which is 96 to 50, right? Okay, so 110 and 96 to 50. Let's try to compute that. Okay, so if you have, dito na lang tayo. If you have your applied computed earlier at 96, 250, and you have your actual, mali pa yung spelling, nakakahiya naman. Okay, and you have here your actual, which is 110, so the difference now will be 96, 250, 40, 3750 plus 10. You now have 13,750, which is under applied. So the standard is lower than your actual. Okay. And you now have the following. Now let's assume that this one is immaterial. The entire 13,750 will be close to your cost of sales. But if this is considered to be material, we are going to allocate them to your work in process, finished goods, and your cost of sales. So, maybe we can do that. We can do that now. Direct materials, kasama ba? Hindi po siya kasama. Okay, so we'll just use this 15 plus 20, that will be 35. So this will now be 2. Tama ba? That will now be 200,000. Okay. So what will now be our rate, no? So we will have 15 over 200. This will be 20 over 200. And this will now be 165 over 200. Okay, so ayan. Yan na yung ratio natin. This is as good as 7.5%. This will be 10%. And pag hinati mo to, this will be around 82.5%. Sige. Sulat ko na nga. Tama ba? Okay. So, paki-compute na lang. Feel free to compute, no, using your calculator. This will be 85, 87. No, it's 82. 82.5%. Okay. Now you multiply that, okay, by 13,750. Okay. So after multiplying, what do you get? Okay. Now let's see. You have there you go. Let's try to compute. Okay, let's multiply 7.5%. 7.5% is 0.075. Okay, times 13,750. Ta-da! And you will have 1,031.25. Okay? Again, okay? What about 10%? Oh, this will now be 1,375. And one more, you have 82. So 0.825 times 13,750. Okay, and you will now have up to 11,000. No, wala na. Parang 11,000. I think it's 11,343.25 or 75. Let's go back. 0.75. Okay, so, ayun. This is what we are going to use, no? If we're going to allocate 13,750 to these materials, okay? Which means after allocating, okay, it will no longer be 15, 20, and 165. Ayan. So, what will be our journal entry for method 1? Okay, in recording your actual, okay, what is our actual? It's 110,000 pesos. So, this will be 110,000, 110,000 pesos. Same entry for the, ano nangyari? Ayun. For the second method. And then for the applied, okay, nakalimutan ko na. Ano na yung applied natin? 96. Ayun. 96,250. Okay. 96,250. And this one was computed earlier. No? 96,250. 96,250. Okay po. Take note the difference. This one will be recorded using your factory overhead control. This one will be a different account. Factory overhead applied. Actually, yan tsaka yan parehas lang yan. Okay, now let's continue. So, what if, okay, this one is immaterial. Okay, so under applied tayo, no? Ayos, chumamba, under applied. Okay, so our cost of sales will now be adjusted by 13,750. Okay, and this one, okay, we're going to close the entire factory overhead applied, which is 96,250. You're also going to close your actual factory overhead controlled, no, which is 110. And the difference will be 13,750. This one, if it's immaterial, it will go directly to your cost of sales. Diba? So, kumbaga, i-close mo na lang lahat yan sa cost of sales. Anyway, it's only 13,750. Pero if you think 13,750 is material, malaki, you have to allocate that. No? Allocate that to your cost of sales, work in process, and your finished goods. Okay, so dito tayo para mas madali. Our over-applied, no, under-applied is 13,000. Yan, 13,750. Now, let's go back. Ito yun, no? Yung inallocate natin kanina. Now, if you have time, can you please check the total of this one should be 13,750. Now, assuming that is correct, let's continue. 103,125, 1,375, and 11,343. Okay, I think I got that. Okay, so this one will be magkano yan? 1,031.25. This one is 10%, so that's 1,375. And then you have 11,434. No, 340 dapat yun. Okay, 0.75 to make it all 13,750. Okay. Okay ba? Okay. Now, if you're using method 1, I'm not a big fan of method 1 kasi ang daming accounts eh. Pero sige, pagbigyan natin, you close your actual which is 110,000. You close your applied which is 96,000. Wala na, tumanda na ako. It's 96,250. 96,250. And then in your cost of sales, you have 1,000. Tama ba? Wait lang. Parang nalito yata ako. Bakit parang napagbaliktad? Wait. Cost of sales. Ayun, work in process should be 1,031. Ayun pala. Ito dapat yung nandun. Ulitin natin ha. Work in process, finished goods, and then cost of sales. There you go. Work in process. Baliktad. Okay. Let's try to erase this. Mayabang kasi yung instructor ninyo. Ayan. So, in your cost of sales, hindi, sa finished goods tayo kasi mas madali. See, that's only 10%. 1,003. Okay, and if I remember it right, ito yung malaki, yung 11,343.75. And finally, you have 1,031.25. Okay, so, ganun din po tayo dito. Okay, so your cost of sales will be 11,343.75. Work in process will be 1,031.25, and finished goods will be 1,375. Now let's check. Cost of sales is 11,343. Okay. And finished goods is 10%. So, ibig sabihin, ito, tama na. Work in process is 1,031.25. Okay. So, those are your necessary journal entries in recording your factory overhead. Okay, you don't have to apply your factory overhead using all of the bases applicable. You just choose one. Okay, and then in recording your factory overhead, you can use method 1 or method 2. Me, I prefer using method 2. Now, I'm not saying that this one is better than method 1. They are both correct. It's just that for me, this one is more convenient because you just use one account title. Okay po? So, I guess that's it. Now, there are more discussions on factory overhead, okay? Especially on the variance analysis, okay? That one will be included in a different discussion under variance analysis, okay? So I guess that's it, and thank you.